Growing up in BC, I barely had the chance to learn about local Black historical figures. And as someone who is part Black, it's important for me to see that representation because Black people helped make BC what it is today. So for Black History Month this year, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to learn about one prominent Black pioneer, Mifflin Gibbs.
Mifflin Gibbs was born in Philadelphia as a free Black man in 1823, and he landed in San Francisco, 10 cents in his pocket. At that point, they realized that the state of California didn't like Black people at all, and they decided that the whole community should move. Turned out they had an invitation from Sir James Douglas in Victoria, and they went up, took a look. It was great. They loved it.
Speaking with Crawford, I learned that Mifflin was a man of many firsts. His store in Victoria was one of the first competitors for the Hudson's Bay Company, and in 1866, he was the first Black person elected to public office in what is now BC. He also helped with something even bigger.
He was elected in the 1860s to what was called the Yale Convention. This was a meeting of people from Vancouver Island and all of British Columbia who were getting together to decide if Canada forms a confederation, do we join it and on what terms? So Gibbs was very active in thrashing that out.
Today, Gibbs doesn't have any family still living in BC. But his great-great-great-grandniece came to Victoria to unveil a bronze plaque dedicated to Gibbs in Irving Park in 2019. In another conversation we had, you mentioned that Mifflin was like this force in your life and someone you looked up to. Why is that?
There was a big thing about perseverance and just the things even that he had to go through when he came to Canada. And so I would say to myself, if he could do it when times were really bad, then whatever I was confronted with, that I should be able to learn something from him.
If you look for it, Mifflin Gibbs's legacy can be found all around Victoria today. His plaque in Irving Park marks where he used to live. Just down the street, there's a study room named after him at the local branch of the Greater Victoria Public Library.
One of the items that we have,
the Royal BC Museum has some artifacts in their archives from Gibbs's time in BC.
This document is from the Cowichan district. It shows a parcel of land that he purchased. This is an early copy of Shadow and Light, which is Mifflin Gibbs's autobiography. This one has an introduction by Booker T. Washington, and it's a signed edition.
So with all of this evidence of his significance in BC, why didn't I get to learn about him? And why aren't kids today hearing his story and that of other Black pioneers?
They were a big part of the population in the 1860s, proportionally speaking. But by the 1880s, 1890s, there weren't so many, and they didn't have that much influence anymore. They weren't noticed that much. So we forgot.
More representation in history classes is something the BC Black History Awareness Society is pushing for.
You know, when a Black kid goes to school and learns that, a Black person was in a position of leadership, you know, it really warms your heart. It really makes you feel better and makes you grow a little bit more, you know. And it gives you self-confidence, right? So all those little things are important because they make you a stronger person.
Thinking back to the few times I had the chance to learn about Black historical figures who helped change the world, it filled me with pride. It reinforced the idea to keep going, to work hard, and to fight negative stereotypes. But anything I know about BC's Black history, I learned on my own, because it wasn't mandatory for teachers to include that part of history.
When you learn about other people's history, it reduces discrimination. It reduces the barriers of ignorance and prejudice.
People like Sylvia are working with the Ministry of Education to update BC school curriculum to include more Black history. But talk stalled leading up to the provincial election. In a statement, the ministry says it's still working with the BC Black History Awareness Society to identify teacher and student resources. It looks forward to working with the group more in the months ahead. Why should students be learning about people like Mifflin Gibbs?
I've long believed that if Sir James Douglas hadn't invited the black community to Victoria, the American miners that he knew were coming north to the gold rush could just possibly have annexed all of British Columbia right up to Russia and Alaska. And there wouldn't have been a Canada as we know it if that had happened. Good to know that it wasn't just a bunch of, white guys with funny beards who did everything important in British Columbia. That there were all kinds of people who didn't get any glory, they weren't remembered in anything, but they were here and they made a very big difference to what happened to the rest of us.
There's a story about Mifflin I learned through Crawford and Verna. He was in Rochester and he had just finished his speaking tour promoting the abolition of slavery. He was feeling down, so he confided in a friend. Her response, "Go do some great thing." Well, I think it's fair to say he did go do some great thing, and then some. I hope, especially after a year like 2020, the Ministry of Education continues to work with the Black community to include more Black people in history lessons so that other Black kids are inspired to go do some great things. I'm Ashley Moliere with CBC News in Vancouver.